workshop, strategic plan, and other initiatives. Item 10.1, public hearing and adoption of proposed fiscal year 2012-2013 budget for all funds. It is a conference action item, 15-minute presentation, 20-minute discussion. I will now open the public hearing. Ms. Patty Hagemeyer.
Thank you. Good evening, President Rodriguez, board members, and Superintendent Raymond. This evening, we're asking for your approval on the 2012-13 adopted budget for all funds. While a budget is a fluid document and changes daily, this year in particular, there are many unknowns. Not only do we not know what the state budget will bring, but the outcome of the November election will be critical to our fiscal stability. Just a quick summary of the budget process for the 12-13 fiscal year, which started in December. The board approved a budget timeline for the 2012-13 year. On December 14th, the first interim report for 2011-12 was approved with a qualified status. Just as a reminder, that means we may not be able to meet our financial obligations for the current or 2 subsequent years. In January, staff brought forward as a conference item recommendations and reductions for both the 2011-12 and 2012-13 fiscal year. In January and February, a budget survey was sent out and 5 community forums were held. The superintendent provided district budgetary information and responded to questions from the public. On February 2nd, the board took action on specific items regarding the 2011-12 budget, but more importantly, the 2012-13 budget. In order to maintain our qualified status and not be given a negative status, the board was asked to take action on $28 million of very difficult budget and staffing reductions. On March 15th, the board approved the 2011-12 second interim financial report.
We don't have a quorum. I think we should just wait until we get a quorum.
Thank you. On March 15th, the board approved the 2011-12 second interim financial report, again with a qualified status. A budget overview was presented to the board on April 19th as an information item. This included factors that impact our fiscal solvency, central office information, and a SACS report review. On May 17th, the third interim financial report was approved. On June 14th, the board approved the use of state categorical flexible programs, otherwise known as Tier 3 programs. And then this evening, we're looking for your approval of the 2012-13 adopted budget. I would like to outline the very difficult decisions made in order to achieve a balanced budget. The reductions on this particular slide didn't directly impact the classroom, but were difficult. We're shifting early retirement incentive payments, PARs, to be paid out of the Retiree Benefits Fund. The next item is the reduction of contracts and central office operating budgets funded with unrestricted dollars by $1 million. We know, based on our conversations at last week's board meeting, that a large portion of this is from the SRO contract. In addition, legal services contracts were reduced, professional development contracts were reduced or eliminated, and one-time contracts were eliminated. The corresponding funds were reduced from the various departmental budgets. The use of the reserve for the retiree unfunded liability is one-time, but still a savings. Savings of $500,000 was realized from reducing central office staffing or equivalent reductions. The following unrepresented positions were eliminated: Communication Specialist, Director 2 for Attendance Dropout Prevention and Recovery, the Coordinator of District Athletics, which is coming back as a per diem position, an unrepresented Supervisor of Student Services, and a Coordinator of Equity, Access, and Excellence. In addition to these reductions, several positions were reclassified to a lower salary. Divisions that took very deep cuts in 2010-11 and couldn't sustain operations with additional staffing reductions took additional cuts in their operating budgets. A savings of $190,000 was recognized by implementing salary reductions for 5 furlough days, as well as freezing step and column increases for unrepresented management, unrepresented supervisors, and confidential staff. These 5 furlough days are not contingent on the tax initiative and will be implemented regardless of what happens in November. They equate to a 2.2% salary reduction for management. UPE has also agreed to 5 non-contingent furlough days. At the previous board meeting, Board Member Cuneo asked what a 5% and 10% salary reduction for management only would save. 5% would save $269,000. A 10% reduction would save $538,000. And just as a reminder, unrepresented employees, along with UPE and CSA, have taken pay cuts each year in addition to furlough days, as they have completely funded the health benefit increases we've seen each year, averaging about 10% a year. Other bargaining units have not borne the brunt of that additional cost. Also included on this slide is the 25% reduction to the board stipend for the 2012 calendar year. The amount of the stipend will be reinstated effective January 1st, 2013. Starting with slide 5, the program reductions impacted the classrooms more and more. As discussed during the Tier 3 agenda item last week, the Tier 3 funding for adult education is eliminated. The Fremont site will be closed with some of the ESL, Adult Basic Ed GED, and high school completion classes relocated to the Charles A. Jones Career and Education Center. ESL classes at school sites will be supported by schools. The Charles A. Jones Career and Education Center will remain open and self-supporting. They will continue their career and technical education classes and will offer additional ESL classes, one additional Adult Basic Ed GED class, along with one part-time high school class for adults and concurrent students to help mitigate the loss at Fremont Adult School. McClaskey will remain open as discussed at last week's meeting. The parent participation preschools will continue and will be supported by the increased parent fees. Parent education will continue at the school sites. It is anticipated that about 23 sites will use some of their categorical dollars to support this program. Parent ed and ESL classes will continue at Phoenix Park. ESL and citizenship classes will continue at Green Fair. The elimination of the deferred maintenance funding has been classified as one-time, as we will not be able to maintain our facilities without some funding coming back in 2013-14. The elimination of the School Library Improvement Block Grant eliminates funding for 3.6 middle school librarians and literacy support at K-8 schools. Continuing on with Tier 3 programs, the elimination of the Arts and Music Grant eliminates 5.6 supplemental music teachers. ROP and the GATE program each received a 5% reduction in funding. Moving on from the Tier 3 programs, class sizes were increased to contract maximums in grades K through 3. Other grades were already at contract max. Custodial and plant managers were reduced by 50%. The remaining staff will be deployed to address the most critical areas: kindergarten rooms, kitchens, cafeterias, restrooms, and the emptying of garbage cans. Additional cleaning will only be accomplished during periods when students are not at school. Options have been discussed and reviewed, and that work will continue over the summer. Completing the list of reductions are the elimination of middle and high school counselors. As discussed last week, 10.6 counselor positions will be funded from Central Title I funding. In addition, approximately 11.8 counselor positions are funded with site-specific categorical funds. The total counselor positions at this time are 22.4 FTEs. Staff continue to work to identify additional categorical dollars that may be used to reinstate additional counselor positions. Maintenance staff was reduced by 20%. This included the elimination of such positions as laborers, labor gardeners, and painters, and will impact the upkeep of our sites. Also discussed last week was the reduction instead of elimination of co-curricular activities. A 50% reduction of assistant principals has been factored into the budget. The elimination of home-to-school transportation is still included. Staff continue to work on options to at least address safety issues. The elimination of middle and high school librarians, followed by the closure of Freeport Elementary, completes this particular slide. Also included in the 2012-13 adopted budget is the assumption of $15 million in savings based on approved and pending agreements with our bargaining unit partners. Agreements contain mostly contingency language should the governor's tax initiative not pass. Grand total reductions included in the budget are $43.33 million. Continuing to focus on the general fund, the beginning fund balance is budgeted at $10.525 million, along with revenues of $347.4 million and transfers in made up of charter school fees, bringing the total revenues to $358.67 million. If you look at our total revenues of $358.67, less our expenditures of $349.14 million, the ending fund balance for 2012-13 is $9.52 million. This is down $1 million from the current year due to the use of the reserve for the unfunded retiree benefits to balance 2012-13. The ending fund balance has two components. The reserve for revolving cash and stores is $545,000, followed by the reserve for economic uncertainties of $8.98 million. This is a bit more than the required 2%, and we will continue to work to grow this reserve as much as possible. The major funding source for our district is the revenue limit funds we receive for average daily attendance, or ADA. Included in the adopted budget is the recommended $441 per ADA reduction should the governor's tax initiative not pass. However, this reduction was reduced by the anticipated restoration of flexible transportation revenue. We are funded on the higher of current or prior year ADA, so for our district, we're funded on 2011-12 P2 ADA of $41,380. I'm going to go quickly through the revenue and expenditure items. The federal revenue included in the adopted budget are special education funds, No Child Left Behind, vocational technology, and safe and drug-free schools for a subtotal of $35.55 million. Other federal revenue included in the adopted budget include Medi-Cal, smaller learning communities, Project Thrive, Department of Rehab, ROTC, Indian Education, Independent Living, and a Good Behavior Grant for a total of $40.2 million in federal revenue. State revenues included in the adopted budget on the restricted side are special education funds, economic impact aid, lottery that is restricted only for instructional materials, after-school education and safety, drug, alcohol, tobacco grants, and the QEIA funds for a subtotal of $48.13 million in restricted state revenue. Other state revenue includes Medi-Cal activities funds, special education mental health and workability funds, and foster youth grants. The total restricted state revenue is $51.87 million. Unrestricted state revenue includes K-3 class size reduction, lottery, and other state revenue of the Tier 3 programs, supplemental hourly programs, and STAR testing. The total unrestricted state revenue in the budget totals $49.38 million. This slide reflects the total state revenue, restricted and unrestricted funds totaling $101.25 million. It is important to note that these revenues, both state and federal, will increase over the year as grant funds are received and allocated. In addition to federal and state revenues, we also have local revenues in the adopted budget. These include interest, charter school fees and leases, Multiple Pathways Grant, California Endowment, Children's Health Insurance Program Reauthorization, otherwise known as CHIPRA, PE Initiative, Special Education and Gang Reduction Intervention Program, or GRIP, grant revenues. Local revenues total $2.45 million. Expenditures included in the adopted budget start with salaries and benefits. $150.5 million for certificated salaries, $44.7 million for classified salaries, and $96.55 million for employee benefits. The subtotal for these expenditures is almost $292 million. This is 84% of our total expenditures. If you were to just look at the unrestricted expenditures, salary and benefits are 90% of the total, and that's similar to what it is in the current year. Total expenditures in the adopted budget are outlined on this slide. In addition to salaries and benefits, you have books and supplies, services and other operating expenditures, capital outlay, other outgo, which is our debt service payment, and finally, a credit for indirect costs. Those are the costs we charge to our categorical programs. Total expenditures in the adopted budget are $349.1 million. The next three slides outline what will happen in 2013-14 and 2014-15 should the board not take action next year on balancing the budget for those 2 years. You've seen this chart before, and for 2012-13, we're balanced. Our revenues and expenditures are in line, and that's what we want to see. Starting in 2013-14, we know we will have to make additional reductions unless we see additional state revenues or additional ADA. At this point, that amount is $10.5 million. You'll see a big jump in 2014-15. That's when our furlough days savings ends. Class size reduction flexibility is scheduled to sunset. And of course, we know there will likely be health benefit increases and step and column increases. 2014-15 reflects a shortfall of $32.6 million. Again, this reflects no additional revenue from the state or growth in ADA. This slide is another picture of the projected shortfall in 2013-14 and 14-15 and reflects what our fund balance will look like if no action is taken by the board in the future. As you know, we are currently in a qualified status. Should the board not take action in the coming year to balance 2013-14, we will be taken negative by the County Office of Education. And the same holds true for 2014-15. Action will need to be taken to maintain that qualified status. Next steps include continuing to meet with our bargaining unit partners. We will complete and post the budget book this summer and continue to monitor the state budget. Once the state budget is signed by the governor, we'll bring back any impact on the district to the board within 45 days of signing. The first interim financial report will be presented to the board, followed by the all-important results of the November election. The second interim financial report will be presented, and by then we'll be well on our way to the 2013-14 fiscal year budget. I would like to publicly thank Mr. Castillo and staff for all the work that goes into putting together an adopted budget. The SACS forms that you have before you, while they may look somewhat easy, they're difficult, and a lot of work goes into putting them together. And at this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Mike Denkavage to come forward. He's appointed by SCOE to assist with financial matters, and he'd like to make a few comments to the board, and then we're available to respond to questions that you may have.
President Rodriguez, members of the board, Superintendent Raymond, thank you for the opportunity for me to speak on the district's budget. All school districts really face an inherent structural budget imbalance, wherein the governor and legislature control the revenue side, and the board is charged with controlling the expenditure side. The governor and legislature have given us late budgets, budgets built on false assumptions, and now a budget based on an outcome of an event some 5 months from now. To this end, this board has done a remarkable job in dealing with this uncertainty. However, the district remains in a very weak position financially, and additionally, as Patty pointed out, unless there are significant increases in revenues, the district will now need to plan for further reductions in 2013-14. Your budget will remain very fluid and uncertain in the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, the board will be tasked with some very difficult and unpleasant decisions. Thank you.
Does that conclude your presentation? Thank you. Do we have public comment?
We have 4 public comments on this item from Deanna Carrillo, John Shaban, Darlene Anderson, and Lori Eaton.
Good evening. My name is Dina Carrillo. I'm a parent at Theodore Judah Elementary, and I have questions more than comments. My first is to get an explanation from staff on how the district can receive $7 million in state funds to reduce class sizes while you're proposing to increase class sizes for our youngest students. The second is that I noticed that there's an ending fund balance of a $9.5 million reserve. While I applaud the district for having a reserve, I understand that it's above the statutory requirement or of your rules, and I would think that we're in a time of economic uncertainty, and so I'd like some information on the policy decisions on why that reserve is higher than it should be. By my back of the envelope calculation, if you reduce that to the 2%, it could come up with another $3.5 million. There's a lot of cuts on the table. I think that could do a lot of good. My other question would be, or question for consideration would be for management to consider a higher decrease in salary. State workers are contributing 7% more of their salary for benefits. While it might not seem like much, we're all pitching in these times of economic uncertainty, and it would do a lot for appearances given all the cuts that we're having to our children's education at this time. In addition to that, I would speak more specifically to the cuts to custodial services and the basic health and safety for our children and the increase in class sizes in the youngest years. I've got 2 young children, And those teachers, they have their hands full. So I thank you for your consideration. I'd like to hear staff's responses to those questions.
Good evening, Board, President Rodriguez, distinguished board members, and Superintendent Raymond. My name is John Shaban. For the past 8 years, I've been a painter with the school district. After weeks of testimony, the school board is proposing the same budget cuts that you proposed back in February. You clearly have not done your homework, nor have you listened to our testimony. Every school day, we see graffiti in our schools. We see it in our high school bathrooms and other places across the district. As painters, we have the mandate to clean up graffiti within 24 hours. Before students arrive to school, it's gone. We go out early in the morning to clean it all up. If the painter staff is reduced, graffiti will stay up longer, and we will not be able to clean it up in a timely manner. Graffiti is associated with gang activity. The surrounding property values could drop, and gang activity could increase dramatically. The safety of our children could be put at risk. Put our children first, keep them safe from gangs, and please don't lay off painters who provide a critical service for the children and our community. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. President Rodriguez, members of the board, and Superintendent Raymond. My name is Lori Eaton. I am a parent at Theodore Judah Elementary School here in Sacramento. And the reason that I'm here today is to talk about the budget cuts and the effect that they are going to have on our schools, and in particular my school, not to be short-sighted. It does affect all of our schools. For our school, we have been growing over the past several years. We have contributed a lot to the district. And with these budget cuts coming and the expansion, the increase in class sizes, what will happen is it will stunt our growth and we will have to take a step back. And for instance, last year in kindergarten, we had four kindergarten classes. Next year, we will only have 2. We will have to turn away all those families that are trying to come in on permit. And those permit families are wanting to come to our school because it's thriving and we're setting examples and we're growing in the district. We're having to turn away those families. And not only that, but our kindergartners are going to be 32 to a classroom. That's going to be very difficult for the teachers. This is not just a next year problem. This is a very, very long-term problem. It will impact our children for years to come. We could see this problem in 2nd and 3rd grade. In addition, I wanted to address the health and safety concerns that the budget cuts for custodians brings up. 50% reduction. We have a plant manager and a janitor on staff right now. I don't know what that means for our school. It's uncertain. Obviously, all of the parents are concerned about health and safety risks for our children. And so we're just hoping that you take it under advisement and do the best for our school and all schools. Thank you.
Good evening, Darlene Anderson once again. I guess my concern is about the structuring of the district. The district is its own service provider, basically, under a SELPA, and I really can't tell you the benefit of the services that we provide. It's been a struggle for me since I entered into this district on the services that I get for my children through special ed. But looking at the other services that are just general services and understanding this district is in PI Year 3, looking at the LEA plan and trying to attempt to understand where those services are targeted and how you move all kids, I don't see it. I see services that are offered, but I don't see the benefit in the community. So there's this huge disconnect between the community and what the district actually offers. There are some people that just love the district because they're having a wonderful life, because at their school, everything is wonderful. But at other schools, other kids are being documented out of the system, and life is not wonderful. But it would be the board's responsibility to look at the LEA plan and measure growth throughout the district and ensure that growth is happening. But I find myself coming year after year at these budget cut meetings, and I know that the difference between supplanting and to supplant. And so we have contractors who provide services to this district that staff actually provide, and staff report for the contractors. But I can't say that how it benefits the district or how it benefits the district's children, because this district is really not educating a lot. Although, you know, when we start making cuts and kids won't be able to graduate, and they won't be able to look forward to a high school diploma, they may as well start looking at the ninth grade, where kids are failing in those classes because they won't be able to get a high school diploma because the district is making choices now that's going to affect those kids later. Thank you.
Our final public comment on this item is from Nathan Hansford.
Good evening, Board, Superintendent. My name is Nathan Hansford. I'm a field representative for SEIU Local 10-1. I was here last week and offered our assistance, and that offer stands. That being said, I would be remiss in not pointing out that nobody came to us. Nobody came to us concerning these cuts. Nobody came to us for help. We could have helped. We could have mitigated a lot of this. You chose not to come to us, and now we not only have to deal with what the future is, but we are now dealing with the past. I hope you consider that in the future. Before you make these cuts, you go to your labor unions and work with them. We don't have to be adversaries. We work together in most places. We're doing it here. And I think it's a shame that you did this without coming to us. Thank you.
There's no further public comment. I will now close the public hearing, and we'll go into conference. Board Member Terry?
A member of the public brought up my first question. On slide 10, if I did the math right, I'm not going to hold my breath that I did, but I have 2.35 million above the minimum 2% threshold. So can somebody, why are we doing that? I don't think I've noticed that on previous presentations that number was that far askew from our revenue.
No, it's not. We're required to have a 2% reserve, which is about 8.5 million. We're at 8.9. It's important to note that as the budget increases throughout the years, we get more grants and more revenues and
So this ending fund balance is not the reserve? So slide 10? Can we bring up slide 10?
No, go to slide 11. The 9.5 reserve,
So that's cash in stores. Okay.
half of it, 545,000 are for revolving cash in stores. We're required to have that. And the 8.9 million is the reserve for economic uncertainties, required 2%, which right at this moment in the adopted budget is about a 2.5% reserve. But that's going to decrease as additional revenues and expenditures come in throughout the year for grants and those kinds of things. The 2% is based on all the general fund expenditures.
So the total on slide 10, the total revenue number, I just want to make sure I'm
It's
getting
based
this
on
number.
expenses.
Only on, okay, it's based against expenses, not our revenue coming in.
Correct.
So then that number's only a few $100,000 then difference.
Yes.
Okay. Today, yeah, and God knows what the state's actually going to give us. Is there any, does this take into account the agreement that we just agreed to with the SCTA last week? That's
It does.
updated into this, right?
Yes.
Considering the legislature's proposed budget that I believe is going to be voted on Tuesday, I believe. It was in the B today, I don't know. Like they know. Are there any, has school services given us any idea about, I mean, I've read stories about new calculations to revenue and other things like that we're going to save $1 billion overall, but do we have any idea what that means to us?
We're not anticipating anything additional. Everything is that we understand is hinging on the November election.
Okay. Okay. But I think at one point they were saying $1 billion less in social service programs, and that was going to be shared among UCCSU, K-12, and prisons. Am I
Right.
wrong?
A big part of that discussion, and from what we're hearing now, the cut to education is off the table, anything additional. One of the big things that they were talking about were the redevelopment agencies and recouping some of those dollars. And from what we're hearing now, that is off the table as well. So my guess is the cuts that were originally proposed from the governor will not be as deep in some of the social services areas and those kinds of areas, but we're not anticipating, other than what they projected for the November election hit, we're not anticipating any additional cuts to education.
It'd be helpful, Superintendent, I don't know if this is something that we can do between now and the fall, really. But I think it would be helpful to the public and without, I don't want us getting into trouble of campaigning while we're having meetings, but I'd really like to see what a budget looks like and what the school district looks like if we do cut another $15 million. What does that mean beyond furloughs and other things like that are being negotiated? What is that really going to mean, and what's next school year going to look like with that and whatever budget cuts that we have? So I know we're going to start that budget process, very soon and get started, but I think sooner rather than later we should have a public document for folks to see, so that they understand what's at stake in November. So, but beyond that, thank you again for another year of excitement and heartbreak, but you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate you and your staff and everybody and the hard work that you've done to get us to this point. And, these are not easy decisions. It's not easy trying to keep track of a state that doesn't know how to balance a checkbook. And, I always laugh when I remember that the way that you get to set up your targets for how much money we get is something called the dartboard. That always makes me really, really sad for this state some days. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice President Cunha?
So first, I just wanted to thank you for the responsiveness to my questions last time. And so I guess, obviously none of this is fair, and we all know that. But I did pose the question last time, is this equitable? And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and if you think it's an equitable budget. And what I mean is throughout the whole system, we obviously have to make these cuts. And my concern is that we're not, pushing cuts too far in one direction. So do you think it's an equitable distribution of cuts? And if so, why do you think so?
Well, that's very difficult to answer because, as you say, there's nothing fair about any of this. Is it equitable compared to the percentages of different groups that make up our salaries and benefits, for example? Yes, it's probably equitable. Is it equitable to our kids? I don't know how we could make the cuts that we're making and even think that it's equitable. I think everyone is sharing in the pain. I don't believe there's anyone who is not contributing and not sharing in that pain. So from that aspect, I would say, from my perspective, it's equitable.
And I do appreciate that. I also just want to go back, it was my request in general, and I'm not taking credit, but I'm actually trying to praise your responsiveness. You have delivered on the requests in regard to my request for management positions, for management budget, that were made a month ago. Over the last 2 weeks, I went back and I culled all those documents and I reviewed them. I also went out and actually on this equitable issue, did research on other school districts and what they're doing around the state, districts that kind of had comparable student populations as we did. And I found out a couple things. Number one, nobody's as transparent, I think, as our school district is in regard to our budget. It was almost impossible on some of these websites to find any information about what was going to be cut and why. And secondly, I agreed with you. At the end of the day, I came to this conclusion a couple days ago after a couple days of research and looking through everything, that what we are doing is as equitable as we can in this situation. And they actually were more equitable, in my opinion, than some of the school districts around the state, in terms of pushing cuts in certain directions and not trying to at least manage some semblance of the system moving forward in a coherent manner. So I just wanted to say that, and I appreciate your work on this. appreciate the direction, and it's just a terrible time. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Superintendent Raymond.
Thank you, President Rodriguez. I want to echo those words that Vice President Cuneo said about this is an awful time. And I want to just point out in response to Member Terry's question, the public doesn't have to wait till the fall for us to come up with our plan. I mean, if that initiative isn't passed, we're looking at probably a minimum of 2 weeks less of school. I mean that's what we're looking at. I mean, that's the reality. Look at this budget. There's nothing left. What else are we going to cut except the school year? And, which would be a travesty. And as I've said earlier in the week in the paper, every international benchmark by which we're measured, and by the way, the United States is middle of the pack, if not bottom, and going lower, talks about the importance of the length of the school year, the length of the school day. So, that's what we're coming to. And it would behoove everybody to be putting pressure on those that make the decisions. We, as I think was pointed out, the governor and the legislature set the revenue amount. We deal with the expenditures, and we've been dealing with that. And I would point out to one comment, we've been working and talking to everybody in this district, everybody. Coalition meetings that took place earlier this week with every bargaining unit. So we've been talking to them continuously, and we'll continue to do that. I just want to underscore that.
Thank you. Member Terry brought up a thing that I wanted to kind of ask you. Did we have training on these interim reports in the past? And I can't remember.
Training for who?
For us as board members and how to read the interim reports?
I don't recall that we've gone over a specific interim report other than just the presentation. I know we've looked at some areas of the reports. I don't know that, the SACS forms are pretty standard from between interim and adopted and unaudited actuals. But we'd be happy to spend some time with the board in reviewing them.
Yeah, yes. I think that would be a great benefit to both the public and the board because, we have the answers out here on, the general fund that's on page 16 and 17, which is just the roll-up of the entire interim report, so, which explained the reserves. And fund balances especially, if we can do a training for both the board, public, and go into a little bit more about what fund balances are, what creates, what's in those fund balances, and what's restricted in there and what's not restricted. That would be greatly appreciated. And again, thank you both. It's not good news. I know it couldn't have been pleasant to stand there and list off all of those cuts. Thank you very much. Concludes. We have no more questions.
Okay. Action.
Oh, yeah, sorry. We are going into action. So I need a motion to move from conference to action. We have Vice President Cuneo and Vice President Wu. All in favor to move from conference to action? And opposed? And abstentions? And the ayes have it. Now we're in action. We have a motion by Vice President Cuneo for first to approve, and a motion by Vice President Wu. All in favor to approve the proposed fiscal year budget of 12 to 13 for all funds, I'll say aye. Aye. Opposed and abstentions. We have a budget. Thank you, Ms. Hagemeyer and Mr. Castillo.
Thank you very much.
Item 10.2, Sustainable Facilities Master Plan Update and Ballot Measure Plan. It's a conference item, 20 minutes presentation, 30-minute discussion.